Okay, so Task Force 1, our topic was internationalisation well, inequality, but I guess we should change that to equality, I guess, with what we're aiming to do in doctoral education. So can I ask you, imagine you're sitting in your office. So you're in Seattle, you're in Karachi, you're in Mumbai, you're in wherever, and an email comes through and it says, what for you is the most important issue related to internationalisation and inequality in doctoral education? You have 1 minute, because they want your answer, because you're really important and you're on video and they need to know, now, what's the one most important issue for you on that topic? You can go and talk to the person next to you, but don't have to. But I'm going to ask you in a minute from now. Go.
I think the most important issue is to raise the collective intelligence in the country.
Immediately, no borders, no hindrances.
My major concern is the extent to which there's movement out of the developing countries into the developed countries of those that have doctoral education or go for doctoral education, and the imbalance that it creates.
Right. Since we have already many international doctoral students, many of them from developing countries, my most important issue would, if they are good and really, willing and motivated to get a doctoral degree, to help them along without, enticing them to stay in the country, and, provide them with help and scholarships and money so that they can get through that period and finish, and then, give them as many qualifications as possible, A, that they can use in their country upon return, but also B, that are up to international standards.
Adding on to this is also that the home universities do their work, that they also learn from the international students who are adults. Doctoral students are not children, they are experts in something, and that it's not just a one-way flow, because we treat them always, they need to adapt to us, and we are not doing anything. So for me, it's a key, we have a two-way flow on an equal base, just like Ian was saying.
Just to stress one aspect that has been already mentioned, that is strengthening collaboration instead of competition.
Thank you. Now that's quite a lot. Now I have to tell you, our little group had a number of questions to start with, and we tried to divide it up and so on. And we wrote a paper that was the culminate or collation really of different people's views and ideas put into one. Okay, so we did try to address the equitable flow of intellectual capital, and there's quite a lot on that in our paper. We also looked at the role of graduate schools and the role of supporting candidates or students, doctoral candidates, in that sort of notion of supporting the equitable flow. We didn't spend as much time on the whole notion of policies, I suppose because we knew we were going to have some experts to help us, but that's the question we have, and I put those in red each time we came to, so what policies might we develop? They're in red as we go through. So I'll just scamper through fairly quickly and then leave it to the rest of the group to expand on some of the ideas. Thank you. So from the work of a number of the people in our group, we had the notion that, of course, mobility has been a feature for many, many years of scholarly practice. But the term brain drain became popular in the 1960s, and the idea at the time was that the drain was from places like Australia, and so on, UK, to the United States. That's sort of where everyone drained to. And then in the 90s, the notion of brain circulation became more perhaps fashionable, and a number of the people in our group and in our paper, we questioned the notion of actual circulation. Is it real, or is it sort of something that people use as a way of talking about things, but it's not actually showing up in practice? There's also the notion we raised of intra-country and inter-country brain drain. So, for example, Jayaram in India will talk about the notion that there is a drain from one part of India to others. We talked about, again in our group yesterday, about some universities or regional areas that are constantly losing their good people to the larger, more prestigious universities and cities. So it's not even across countries, it can be within a country that can occur. So the notion of brain circulation, we were challenged by Jorge yesterday about, is there a new paradigm for the 2010s? I don't quite know how 1990s kind of flows off the tongue, but I'm not sure. The 2010s, but whatever it is coming from onwards, is there a new paradigm of looking at this notion of brain, movement of intellectual capital, brain drain, brain circulation, and where we're going? And we'd argue in the paper, and certainly from our further discussion, that it's a very complex issue, and there are many creative ways we could think about it. And perhaps that's the challenge for our group, to be creative in doing that. Some of the issues we talked about in the paper are things like, there's the notion of a national or institutional good, not necessarily versus. I started putting versus or then but or and, but I decided I wouldn't have any of those. This is about 2 o'clock this morning when I couldn't think, so I got creative with arrows. There's the individual good, and to what extent can we stop an individual from wanting to promote their own abilities and future and so on with an institutional or a national good? So they're issues that we have to think about, and we discussed briefly in the paper. We had the one here about international collaboration and competition. Are they both possible? Should it only be one? How does that work? It's sort of an issue that we kept on coming up against quite a bit. This was one that Marisi just raised, the notion of benefits to the sending country and to the receiving country. And we have quite a bit in the paper about the research that's virtually all on the international students, their experience, how they change, what they learn, all those sorts of things. My own PhD was on international students in Australia. And our finding was that, in fact, those very intelligent and capable students in the study, despite them making massive changes, there was almost no sign of change to the local Australian students as having been in research labs and teams and groups with these people. So it's exactly the point that Marisi made. Research quality concentrations. I don't know about others, but certainly in Australia it's now becoming more and more, centres of excellence, areas of concentration of research excellence and so on. How does that come up against a distributed model of research where we might say, well, we don't want all the people in a certain part of India to move to the more prestigious universities. We want them to stay in the regional areas and support their regional community. So there's that tension there. And I think these are probably all tensions if we think about them. Some strategies that were reported in our paper, we had some really interesting examples that were sent through, country examples and so on. Encouraging students to undertake studies that are related to their home country. This was one that came through in a number of the studies that were reported, and that the findings relate back to their country. There was quite a bit on that in the paper. Cross-institutional collaborations, we seem to have those, but just how they work and how can they be equitable? Is there still a notion of a dominant paradigm there? We need to think that through very carefully. The other one that was really important that we want to discuss is who validates knowledge. So the one we had yesterday, if you do brilliant work in one country, it may well not be recognised. You do the same work in one of a sort of more dominant country, say you do it in the US or the UK or Germany, and it might be recognised quite differently. So can the same person win the Nobel Prize working in one country and working in another country doing the same work is basically the question. So who validates knowledge and how can we advocate for that sort of thing? Okay. And how can we advocate policies that effectively address internationalisation and inequality in doctoral education was kind of where we ended up yesterday, because we only had about an hour and a half. It was the first time we'd met together. So that's a very quick summary of our paper